The Ashen Wolfs Vow. Sylvain Mercer had always been drawn to fire. As a historian, she specialized in uncovering lost records, and the town of Wolfbane held more secrets than any place she had ever known. They spoke of the Great Burning, the night the town was nearly destroyed. But the deeper she searched, the more she found her own name hidden in the archives, written in ink that smelled like ash. The night she found the final entry, the lanterns flickered out, and the air turned suffocatingly warm. Then a voice, deep and edged with something inhuman, whispered from the doorway. "You were never meant to find this." She turned. A man stood there, his silver eyes reflecting the dying candlelight. "And now you can't leave." Chapter 1. The Scent of Ash and Ink. The air in the Wolfbane Historical Society was always thick with the scent of aged paper and leather, but tonight, a new aroma hung heavy, the sharp, acrid tang of ash. Sylvain Mercer traced the scent with her fingertips, running them along the spines of ancient tomes, her brow furrowed in concentration. She had been researching the town's infamous Great Burning for months, drawn to the event like a moth to a flickering flame, and tonight, she felt closer than ever to uncovering the truth. Wolfbane, nestled deep in a valley shrouded by ancient pines, felt like a place where time had folded in on itself. The modern world, with its bustling cities and relentless technology, seemed a distant dream. Sylvain, at 58, felt a kinship with these forgotten places. Her life, like Wolfbane, held its own hidden corners, its own unexamined embers. A failed marriage, a career that had plateaued, a lingering sense of unfulfillment, these were the ashes of her own personal fires. She had come to Wolfbane seeking not just historical truth, but a spark of something new, a reason to believe in second chances. Her auburn hair, streaked with silver, was usually pulled back in a practical braid, but tonight, a few strands had escaped, framing a face that, while lined with the map of her years, still held a flicker of youthful curiosity in her hazel eyes. She wore a simple, long-sleeved linen dress, the color of faded parchment, practical and unassuming, yet hinting at a quiet elegance. The society was housed in the old town hall, a building that had miraculously survived the Great Burning. Its high, arched windows offered glimpses of the moon, a sliver of silver hanging low in the inky sky. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, a mournful sound that echoed the loneliness Sylvain often felt. She had rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town, a place filled with the comforting scent of wood smoke and old books. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in her research and, perhaps, find herself in the process. Tonight, she was focused on a particularly fragile ledger, its pages brittle and stained. The ink was faded, the script spidery and difficult to decipher. But as Sylvain carefully turned the page, a name jumped out at her, a name that sent a shiver down her spine. Mercer. It wasn't just the name itself, but the way it was written. The slight flourish on the M, the almost desperate slant of the R, it was eerily similar to her own handwriting. She leaned closer, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The entry was dated precisely 150 years ago, the night of the Great Burning. It spoke of a pact, a desperate bargain made to save the town. A pact sealed with ash. Sylvain's breath hitched. The scent was stronger now, almost overpowering, as if the ledger itself were smoldering. She traced the word ash with her fingertip, a strange tingling sensation spreading through her hand. The entry detailed a ritual, a sacrifice, a binding of souls. It spoke of a woman, a Mercer, who had offered herself to something. The text was deliberately vague, hinting at a power both terrifying and alluring. A power connected to the wolves that roamed the surrounding forests, wolves whose howls often echoed through the night, sending shivers down the spines of even the bravest townsfolk. Sylvain had heard those howls, felt their primal call, and a part of her, a deeply buried part, had understood their yearning. She flipped through the remaining pages, her hands trembling. More mentions of the Mercer name, always linked to the fire, to the pact, to the wolves. It was as if her own family history was inextricably intertwined with the tragic history of Wolfbane.
But how?
Her family had always lived in Boston, generations of academics and librarians, far removed from this remote, mysterious town. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, extinguishing one of the oil lanterns that provided the only light in the room. Sylvain jumped, her heart pounding. The scent of ash was now overwhelming, choking. She fumbled for her matches, her fingers clumsy with fear. Another lantern flickered, then died. Darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. Then she heard it. A voice, deep and resonant, edged with something inhuman. It seemed to come from the shadows at the far end of the room, near the main entrance. "You were never meant to find this." The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. Sylvain froze, her blood turning to ice. She slowly turned, her eyes straining to pierce the gloom. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and imposing, blocking the faint moonlight that filtered through the entrance. And now, the voice continued, a hint of something ancient and powerful underlying the words, "You can't leave." She could only make out the outline of his form, but as her eyes adjusted, she caught a glint of silver his eyes, reflecting the dying embers of the last lantern, holding a light that was both captivating and terrifying. The scent of ash intensified, and with it, a new scent, wild and musky, like the forest after a rain. It was a scent that both repelled and intrigued her, a scent that stirred something deep within her, something she had long thought dormant. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but her voice caught in her throat, trapped by a fear she had never known before. The ledger slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor with a soft thud, the sound lost in the growing darkness. The last lantern sputtered and died, leaving her alone with the stranger and the suffocating scent of ash. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Wolfbane Archives. The darkness was absolute. Sylvain could hear her own ragged breathing, the frantic beat of her heart, and the almost imperceptible rustle of the stranger's clothing as he moved, slowly, deliberately, into the room. The scent of ash and wild musk grew stronger, filling her senses, making her head spin. She wanted to run, to scream, but her legs felt rooted to the floor, her voice trapped in her throat. Who are you?" She finally managed to whisper, the sound barely audible even to her own ears. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another step closer, and she could hear the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his weight. She instinctively took a step back, bumping against a table that held the remnants of her research. The scattered papers rustled, a fragile sound in the oppressive silence. "Names of power, Sylvain Mercer," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. "And some names are best left unspoken." He knew her name. That, more than anything, sent a fresh wave of fear through her. How could he know her name? She had only been in Wolfbane for a few months, and she had kept to herself, spending most of her time either at the Historical Society or in her secluded cottage. I don't understand," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady, to project an air of calm she certainly didn't feel. "What do you want?" He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent shivers down her spine.
"What?"
"I want what was promised. What your ancestor promised." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Sylvain's mind raced, trying to make sense of his cryptic statement.
"The pact."
The ledger. The Mercer name. It was all connected. She knew it, but the pieces weren't fitting together. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice gaining a little strength, fueled by a growing sense of indignation. "I'm a historian. I study the past. I don't make pacts." He moved again, closer still. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a strange, almost unnatural warmth. She could smell him more distinctly now, the sharp, metallic tang of blood mingling with the ash and musk. It was a scent that should have repelled her, but instead, it stirred a strange, unsettling curiosity within her. "The past has a way of catching up with us, Sylvain," he said, his voice closer now, almost a whisper against her ear. "Especially when it's written in blood and ash." She could feel his breath on her cheek, and she instinctively flinched. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She gasped, pulling her hand away as if burned. "Don't be afraid," he said, his voice softening slightly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Not yet, anyway." The implied threat hung in the air, a silent promise of something to come. Sylvain felt a surge of anger, a spark of defiance that momentarily overcame her fear. "Get out," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Get out of here, and leave me alone." He laughed again, a sound that was both mocking and sad. "You can't escape your destiny, Sylvain. It's in your blood. It's in your name. It's in the very air you breathe." He took a step back, and for the first time, she could see his face more clearly. The moonlight, filtering through a gap in the heavy curtains, illuminated his features. He was strikingly handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and a mouth that was both sensual and cruel. But it was his eyes that captivated her, those silver eyes that seemed to glow with an inner light, a light that was both captivating and terrifying. They were the eyes of a predator, but also, she thought, the eyes of someone who had known great sorrow. "I will leave you for now," he said, his gaze holding hers captive. "But I will be back. And when I return, you will understand. You will remember." He turned and walked towards the door, his movements fluid and graceful, like a wolf moving through the shadows. As he reached the threshold, he paused, turning his head slightly to look back at her. "The wolves are calling, Sylvain," he whispered. "Can you hear them?" And then he was gone. Sylvain stood there for a long moment, her body trembling, her mind reeling. The scent of ash and musk lingered in the air, a reminder of his presence. She slowly sank to the floor, her legs no longer able to support her. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The wolves. He had said the wolves were calling. She listened, and for the first time since arriving in Wolfbane, she truly heard them. Their howls, rising and falling on the night wind, no longer sounded mournful or lonely. They sounded hungry. Chapter 3. The Night of the Burning Lanterns. The howls faded, leaving a silence that was even more unsettling. Sylvain remained on the floor, huddled against the cold, her mind racing through the events of the past hour. The stranger's words echoed in her head. "You can't escape your destiny. It's in your blood. It's in your name." She stood up, her legs shaky, and fumbled for the matches she had dropped earlier. Her hands were still trembling, but she managed to strike one, the small flame illuminating the immediate area. She lit one of the fallen lanterns, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The room, once a sanctuary of history and research, now felt like a prison. She looked down at the ledger, lying open where it had fallen. The entry about the pact, the sacrifice, the Mercer name, stared back at her, a silent accusation. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the faded ink. It was real. It wasn't some elaborate hoax or a figment of her imagination. There was a connection between her and this town, a connection that stretched back generations. She needed to know more. She needed to understand what the stranger had meant, what this pact entailed, and what it had to do with her. But the ledger offered only fragments of information, tantalizing hints of a larger, more terrifying truth. She spent the rest of the night poring over the archives, searching for any mention of the pact, the Mercer family, the wolves. She found snippets of information scattered throughout various documents, old town records, personal diaries, even a collection of children's rhymes that spoke of the Ashen Witch and the wolf's embrace. The more she read, the more a picture began to emerge, a picture of a town shrouded in secrecy, a town built on a foundation of lies and ancient magic. The Great Burning, she discovered, hadn't been a natural disaster. It had been deliberately set, a desperate attempt to appease something. Something that lived in the woods, something that demanded a sacrifice. And the Mercer family, it seemed, had been the key to that sacrifice. They were the keepers of the pact, the ones who had made the bargain with the creature. Sylvain found references to a woman named Alara Mercer, the woman mentioned in the ledger, the one who had offered herself to save the town. Alara was described as possessing a strange power, an ability to control fire, to communicate with wolves, to bind souls. Sylvain felt a chill run down her spine. Control fire? Communicate with wolves? These were not the traits of ordinary people. These were the traits of witches. The children's rhymes suddenly made sense. The Ashen Witch. Alara Mercer. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, Sylvain felt a growing sense of dread. She had uncovered a truth far more disturbing than she could have ever imagined. Her family, her ancestors, were not just ordinary people. They were different. They were connected to something ancient and powerful, something that was now reaching out to her, across the centuries. She closed the ledger, her hands trembling. She needed to talk to someone, to get some perspective on what she had discovered. But who could she trust? The townsfolk were friendly enough, but she sensed a deep-seated reluctance to talk about the past, a fear of stirring up old secrets. She thought of Elias Thorne, the local librarian, a quiet, unassuming man who had been helpful in her research. He seemed to know more about Wolfbane's history than he let on. Perhaps he could shed some light on this mystery. She gathered her things, her mind still racing. She needed to get out of the historical society, to breathe fresh air, to clear her head. As she reached the door, she paused, looking back at the room. The scent of ash was fainter now, but it still lingered, a reminder of the stranger and his unsettling words. She stepped outside, into the crisp morning air. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the town. The streets were quiet, the only sound the chirping of birds. But as Sylvain walked towards her cottage, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the stranger with the silver eyes, but there was no one there. Only the shadows, lengthening in the early morning light, and the distant, haunting howl of a wolf. It was a single howl, long and drawn out, and it seemed to be directed at her. It was not a howl of hunger this time, but a sound more like a call, a summons. A beckoning. Chapter 4. Silver eyes in the dying light. The walk back to her cottage felt longer than usual, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot, making Sylvain jump. The wolf's howl still echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of the night's unsettling encounter. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the stranger with the silver eyes emerging from the shadows. The cottage, usually a haven of peace and solitude, felt different this morning. The familiar scent of wood smoke and old books couldn't quite dispel the lingering unease that clung to her like a shroud. She locked the door behind her, a futile gesture, she knew, against a threat that seemed to transcend the physical world. She made herself a cup of strong tea, her hands still trembling slightly. She sat at the small kitchen table, gazing out the window at the surrounding woods. The trees, their branches heavy with leaves, seemed to press in on the cottage, their shadows stretching long and ominous in the morning light. She tried to focus on the practical, on the things she could control. She needed to talk to Elias Thorne, the librarian. He was her best hope for understanding what was happening. She also needed to do more research, to delve deeper into the history of the Mercer family, to find out everything she could about Alara Mercer and the Pact. But her thoughts kept returning to the stranger, to his silver eyes, to his touch, to his words. You can't escape your destiny. What was her destiny? Was she doomed to repeat the mistakes of her ancestors? Was she destined to become another Ashen Witch? The thought filled her with a mixture of fear and excitement. The idea of possessing such power, of being connected to something ancient and magical, was both terrifying and alluring. She had always felt a certain emptiness in her life, a sense of something missing. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps this was the spark she had been searching for. She finished her tea, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let fear control her. She would face this challenge head-on, uncover the truth, and decide her own fate. She changed into fresh clothes, choosing a sturdy pair of trousers and a long-sleeved shirt, practical attire for a day of research. She grabbed her satchel, filled with notebooks and pens, and headed out the door. The town was beginning to stir. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, children were playing in the streets, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread. But Sylvain couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider, of being different from these ordinary people. She reached the library, a small, unassuming building nestled between a bakery and a general store. She pushed open the door, the bell above it jingling softly. The library was quiet, only a few patrons browsing the shelves. Elias Thorne was sitting behind the counter, reading a book. He looked up as she approached, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "Sylvain," he said, his voice soft and welcoming. "Good morning. What brings you here so early?" Elias was a man in his late 60s, with a kind face and a quiet demeanor. He had always been helpful and accommodating, providing her with access to the library's extensive collection of local history books. "Elias," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I need your help. I found something last night, something disturbing. Something about the Mercer family and the Great Burning." His smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What did you find?" Sylvain hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. She decided to start with the basics. "I found a ledger, an old one, that mentions a pact, a sacrifice made to save the town. It mentions a woman named Alara Mercer, who offered herself to something." Elias's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. "The Ashen Pact," he murmured, almost to himself. "I thought it was just a legend." "It's not a legend," Sylvain said, her voice trembling. "It's real. And I think I'm connected to it. My family name is Mercer." Elias stared at her for a long moment, his gaze searching. "I knew there was something different about you," he said softly. "I sensed it the moment you walked into this library." "What do you know, Elias?" Sylvain asked, her voice pleading. "Please tell me everything." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's a long story, Sylvain, and a dangerous one. The people of Wolf Fane don't like to talk about it. They fear that by speaking of the past, they will awaken something that is best left dormant. But I need to know," Sylvain insisted. "I need to understand what's happening to me." Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. "Very well," he said, "but not here. Come to my house tonight, after dark. We can talk more freely there." He gave her directions to his house, a small cottage on the edge of town, not far from her own. She thanked him, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. As she left the library, she felt a presence behind her. She turned and there he was, the stranger. He was standing across the street, leaning against a lamppost, his silver eyes fixed on her. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just watched her, a faint smile playing on his lips. The same smile she'd seen in the dying light of the lanterns. The smile of a predator who had found his prey. Chapter 5. A pact sealed in smoke. The sight of him, standing there so casually, so confidently, sent a fresh wave of fear through Sylvain. She wanted to run, to hide, but she forced herself to stand her ground. She wouldn't let him intimidate her. She met his gaze, her chin lifted in defiance. He pushed himself off the lamppost and slowly crossed the street, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. He stopped a few feet in front of her, his silver eyes boring into hers. "We meet again, Sylvain Mercer," he said, his voice a low murmur that sent shivers down her spine. "It seems destiny has a way of bringing us together." "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. He smiled, a slow, sensual smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I told you. I want what was promised. What your ancestor, Alara, promised." "I don't know anything about a promise," Sylvain said, her voice gaining a little strength. "I'm just a historian. I'm not involved in any pacts." He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that made her skin crawl. "You are more involved than you realize, Sylvain. The blood of Alara Mercer flows through your veins. You carry her power, her legacy, her curse." "Curse?" Sylvain repeated, the word sending a chill through her. "Yes," he said, his voice softening slightly. "A curse that binds you to this town, to this land, to me. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She pulled her hand away, as if burned. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice sharp. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Afraid, Sylvain?" "No," she lied, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm just not interested." He laughed, a sound that was both mocking and sad. "You will be," he said. "You can't deny what you are, Sylvain. You can't deny your destiny." "I make my own destiny," she said, her voice firm. He shook his head, his silver eyes gleaming. "No, Sylvain. Your destiny was written long ago, in blood and ash. And I am here to ensure that it is fulfilled." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of people milling about the town square. Sylvain watched him go, her body trembling, her mind reeling. His words echoed in her head, "A curse that binds you to this town, to this land, to me." She felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that she was caught in a web of ancient magic and dark secrets, a web from which there was no escape. She thought of Elias Thorne, of his offer to help her, to tell her everything he knew. She needed to see him, to hear his story, to understand what she was up against. She spent the rest of the day trying to distract herself, to focus on her research, but it was no use. The stranger's words, his presence, his touch, had unsettled her too deeply. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that he was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her. As dusk began to fall, she prepared to go to Elias's house. She dressed warmly, choosing clothes that would offer some protection against the chill night air. She grabbed her satchel, filled with notebooks and pens, and a small, silver knife that she had inherited from her grandmother. It wasn't much, but it gave her a small measure of comfort. She stepped outside, into the gathering darkness. The streets were quiet, the only sound the distant howling of wolves. She walked quickly, her eyes darting from side to side, scanning the shadows. She reached Elias's house, a small cottage on the edge of town, not far from her own. A single light shone from a window, casting a warm glow onto the overgrown garden. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding. Elias opened it almost immediately, his face etched with concern. "Sylvain," he said, his voice hushed. "Come in, quickly." She stepped inside, and he closed the door behind her, locking it securely. The cottage was small and cozy, filled with the scent of old books and wood smoke. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "Thank you for seeing me, Elias," Sylvain said, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course," he said. "I know you must be frightened. I saw him, you know, the man with the silver eyes." Sylvain's eyes widened. "You know him?" Elias nodded, his expression grim. "Yes. He is a part of the story. A very important part." He gestured for her to sit down on a comfortable armchair near the fire. He sat opposite her, his gaze intense. "The Ashen Pact," he began, his voice low and somber, "was made a long time ago, on the night of the Great Burning. The town was being consumed by flames, and the people were desperate. They had tried everything to stop the fire, but nothing worked. Alara Mercer stepped forward," he continued. "She offered a solution. A bargain. She said she could appease the creature that was causing the fire, but it would require a sacrifice." "A sacrifice of what?" Sylvain asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with sadness. "A sacrifice of herself. And a promise. A promise that her descendants would continue to honor the pact, to keep the creature satisfied." "Satisfied with what?" Sylvain asked, a growing sense of horror filling her. Elias hesitated, his gaze shifting to the fire. "With blood. With life. With love." The smoke from the fireplace swirled, almost forming shapes, faces, in the flickering light, and for a moment, Sylvain thought she saw Alara's face, sorrowful and resigned, staring back at her from the flames. Chapter 6. The Forgotten History of Sylvain. Sylvain stared into the flames, Mesmerized by the swirling smoke, the image of Alara's face burned into her mind. The weight of Elias's words pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. Blood, life, love. The price of the pact was far steeper than she could have ever imagined. But why? She whispered, her voice trembling. Why would Alara make such a bargain? Elias sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. She did it to save the town, Sylvain. To save her family, her friends, her neighbors. She believed she had no other choice. But what was this dark creature? Sylvain asked, her voice filled with dread. What could demand such a sacrifice? Elias hesitated, his gaze shifting nervously around the room. They call him the Wolf of Ash, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. A creature of immense power, ancient and inhuman. He is said to live in the woods, among the wolves, and to have the ability to control fire, to shapeshift, to bind souls. The Wolf of Ash. The name sent a shiver down Sylvain's spine. It was the same creature mentioned in the ledger, the same creature the stranger had alluded to. The stranger, could he be? The man with the silver eyes, Sylvain said, her voice barely audible. Is he the Wolf of Ash? Elias looked at her, his eyes wide with fear. His name is Corvus, he said, his voice trembling. And yes, he is the one. He has walked this earth for centuries, bound to this town by the Ashen Pact. He is the one who demands the sacrifice. Corvus. The name felt like a curse on her tongue. The handsome, terrifying stranger who had haunted her dreams, who had touched her with his electric touch, was the creature from the legends, the creature who demanded blood and life and love. But what does he want with me? Sylvain asked, her voice pleading. I'm just me. I'm not Alara. You are her descendant, Sylvain, Elias said, his voice firm. You carry her blood, her power. And, according to the pact, the Wolf of Ash has a claim on the blood of Alara Mercer. He has a claim on you. Sylvain felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She was trapped. Trapped by a pact made centuries ago, trapped by a destiny she didn't choose, trapped by a creature who desired her for reasons she couldn't comprehend. Is there any way to break the pact? She asked, her voice desperate. Is there any way to escape? Elias shook his head, his expression grim. I don't know, Sylvain. I've searched for years, studying the old texts, looking for a loophole, a way out. But I haven't found anything. The pact is binding, sealed in blood and ash. It is unbreakable. Sylvain felt a surge of despair, a feeling of utter hopelessness. She was doomed. Doomed to be a pawn in this ancient game, doomed to be a sacrifice to a creature of darkness. There must be something, she said, her voice trembling. There has to be a way. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with pity. There is one thing, he said, his voice hesitant. A legend, a whisper of a chance. They say that the Wolf of Ash can be tamed. That his heart, hardened by centuries of darkness, can be softened. Softened by what? Sylvain asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias looked at her, his gaze intense. By love, Sylvain. By true, unconditional love. But he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, it is said that the love must be freely given, not taken. And it must be the love of a Mercer, a descendant of Alara. Sylvain stared at him, her mind reeling. Love? Could love be the key to breaking the pact? Could love be the weapon against this ancient creature? But how could she possibly love Corvus, the Wolf of Ash, the man who had terrified her, who had threatened her, who had claimed her as his own? The fire in the hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The smoke swirled, forming shapes, faces, images. Sylvain saw Alara's face again, but this time, it was different. It was no longer sorrowful. It was hopeful. And then, she saw another face, a face that was both familiar and terrifying. Corvus. His silver eyes, gleaming in the firelight, seemed to pierce her soul. But this time, she didn't see only darkness in those eyes. She saw something else. A flicker of loneliness, a hint of vulnerability, a trace of longing. A single tear, seemingly made of liquid ash, traced a path down his cheek, leaving a shimmering trail in its wake. Chapter 7. Echoes of the Great Burning. The image of Corvus, his face marked by that single, shimmering tear, lingered in Sylvain's mind long after the smoke had cleared. It was a jarring contrast to the predatory confidence he had displayed in their previous encounters. Could there be more to him than the monster he appeared to be? Could Elias be right? Could love, her love, be the key to breaking the Ashen Pact? Love is a powerful force, Sylvain, Elias said, breaking the silence. It can heal, it can transform, it can redeem. But it is also a dangerous force. It can blind, it can deceive, it can destroy. I don't understand, Sylvain said, shaking her head. How can I possibly love someone like him? He's a creature of darkness, a monster who demands sacrifice. He is what he is because of the pact, Elias said, his voice gentle. The pact has twisted him, corrupted him, turned him into something he was never meant to be. He is trapped, just as you are, bound by the choices of his ancestors. But he's lived for centuries, Sylvain said. He's had plenty of time to change. Time is a different thing for him, Sylvain, Elias explained. He doesn't age as we do. He is frozen, in a way, caught between life and death, between the human world and the other world. He is a creature of shadows, of twilight, of in-between. Sylvain shivered, despite the warmth of the fire. The thought of Corvus, existing in such a liminal state, filled her with a strange mixture of pity and fear. What happened to Alara? Sylvain asked, changing the subject. After she made the pact, what became of her? Elias's expression saddened. She lived a short life, Sylvain. The pact took its toll on her. She faded away, consumed by the very fire she had sought to control. But before she died, she left behind a journal, a record of her experiences, her thoughts, her feelings. A journal? Sylvain's heart quickened. Where is it? Can I see it? Elias hesitated. It's here, he said, gesturing to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. But it's dangerous. It's filled with Alara's power, her magic. It's not something to be trifled with. I need to see it, Elias, Sylvain insisted. It might hold the key to understanding the pact, to breaking it. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. Very well, he said, reluctantly. But be careful, Sylvain. Alara's words have power. They can affect you. He got up and went to the cabinet, unlocking it with a small, ornate key. He took out a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. He handed it to Sylvain, his hand trembling slightly. This is it, he said. Alara's journal. Read it carefully, Sylvain. And be warned. Sylvain took the journal, her hands trembling. The leather felt warm to the touch, as if it were alive. She opened it carefully, the pages crackling softly. The ink was faded, but still legible, the script spidery and elegant, just as she had seen it in the ledger. She began to read. Alara's words flowed across the pages, drawing Sylvain into her world, into her thoughts, into her heart. Alara wrote of her fear, her desperation, her love for her town, her family. She wrote of the Wolf of Ash, of his power, his beauty, his sadness. She wrote of their first encounter, of the terror she felt, but also of the strange attraction. She wrote of his loneliness, his isolation, his longing for connection. She wrote of how she began to see him not as a monster, but as a creature trapped by his own nature, by the weight of centuries. She wrote of how she began to pity him. And then, slowly, tentatively, she wrote of how she began to love him. Sylvain read on, her heart pounding, her tears falling onto the pages. Alara's words resonated with her own experiences, her own feelings. She, too, had felt that strange mixture of fear and attraction towards Corvus. She, too, had sensed his loneliness, his vulnerability. As she reached the end of the journal, Sylvain found a passage that made her breath catch in her throat. Alara wrote of a prophecy, a whisper of hope. She wrote of a descendant, a woman who would come after her, a woman who would have the power to break the pact, to free the Wolf of Ash, to heal him. A woman who would love him. Sylvain closed the journal, her mind reeling. The prophecy, it was about her. She was the descendant, the woman who could break the pact. But could she? Could she truly love Corvus, the Wolf of Ash? She looked up at the window, the dark pressing against the glass, and the reflection of the moon made a perfect silver circle in the middle of the pane. It felt like his eye, watching her. Chapter 8. The wolf's shadow lengthens. The moon, a silver disk in the inky sky, seemed to mirror Corvus's eye, watching her, waiting. Sylvain closed Alara's journal, the weight of the prophecy heavy on her heart. She was the one who could break the pact, free Corvus, heal him with love. But the idea still felt impossible, terrifying. Elias, she said, her voice trembling, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can love him. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. It's not going to be easy, Sylvain, he said. Corvus has been consumed by darkness for centuries. He has hurt people, he has caused pain, he has killed. But Alara, she loved him, Sylvain said, clutching the journal to her chest. She saw something in him, something worth saving. Alara was a remarkable woman, Elias said. She had a strength, a compassion, that few possess. But even her love couldn't completely break the pact. It only delayed it. Delayed it? Sylvain asked, her voice hopeful. What do you mean? The pact requires a sacrifice every generation, Elias explained. Alara's love, it changed the nature of the sacrifice. It shifted it from a physical sacrifice, a life taken, to something else. To what? Sylvain asked, her breath catching in her throat. To a bond, Elias said. A soul bond. A connection between the Wolf of Ash and a descendant of Alara. A bond that feeds him, sustains him, keeps him tethered to this world. A soul bond. The words sent a shiver down Sylvain's spine. She remembered the stranger's words. A curse that binds you to this town, to this land, to me. Was this the bond he had spoken of? But what does that mean for me? Sylvain asked, her voice trembling. What will happen to me if I bond with him? Elias hesitated, his gaze shifting nervously around the room. The bond is powerful, Sylvain, he said. It connects you to Corvus on a deep, fundamental level. You will feel his emotions, his pain, his desires. And he will feel yours. It's a merging of souls, he continued, his voice low. A sharing of life force. It will change you, Sylvain. It will make you more like him. More like him. The thought filled Sylvain with a mixture of fear and excitement. She remembered the power she had felt when he had touched her, the electricity that had coursed through her veins. Was that a taste of what the bond would be like? But if I break the pact, Sylvain said, her voice desperate, will the bond be broken too? Elias nodded, his expression grim. Yes, he said. If you break the pact, the bond will be severed. Corvus will be free. And you will be free as well. But how do I break it? Sylvain asked. Alara's journal doesn't say. It's not something that can be easily explained, Sylvain, Elias said. It's not a ritual, a spell, a formula. It's a choice. A decision. A surrender. Surrender? Sylvain repeated, the words sending a chill through her. You must surrender to your feelings, Sylvain, Elias said. To your love for Corvus. You must embrace the bond, accept it, become one with him. Only then can the pact be broken. Only then can you both be free. Surrender to her love for Corvus. It sounded impossible, terrifying. But as Sylvain looked into the fire, she saw his face again, his silver eyes, his vulnerability, his longing. And she knew deep down that it was the only way. She stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve firm. I need to see him, she said. I need to talk to him. Elias looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. Be careful, Sylvain, he said. Corvus is dangerous. He may not be willing to cooperate. I have to try, Sylvain said. I have to do this. For myself. For Alara. For him. She thanked Elias for his help, and for the journal, and left the cottage, stepping out into the cool night air. The moon was high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the town. She walked towards her own cottage, her heart pounding, her mind racing. As she reached her front door, she saw him. He was standing in the shadows, leaning against a tree, his silver eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He was waiting for her. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice a low murmur that sent shivers down her spine. The wolf's shadow, cast long and distorted by the moon, seemed to merge with his own, making him appear larger, more menacing, more wolf-like. Chapter 9. A Touch That Sparks and Burns. The wolf's shadow, elongated and distorted by the moonlight, seemed to meld with Corvus's own form, amplifying his already imposing presence. Sylvain's breath caught in her throat, but she forced herself to stand her ground, to meet his gaze. "I need to talk to you, Corvus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her heart. He pushed himself off the tree and slowly approached her, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator closing in on its prey. He stopped a few feet in front of her, his silver eyes boring into hers. "Talk," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "About what, Sylvain? About the pact? About your destiny? About your feelings?" The last word was spoken with a deliberate emphasis, a subtle challenge that sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered Elias's words. "You must surrender to your feelings about all of those things," she said, her voice firm. "I've been learning about Alara, about the pact, about you." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "And what have you learned, Sylvain?" "I've learned that you're not just a monster," she said, her voice softening slightly. "That you're trapped. Just like I am." He scoffed, a harsh, cynical sound. "Trapped? I am not trapped, Sylvain. I am powerful. I am eternal. You're bound to this town, to this pact, to me," Sylvain said, her voice gaining strength. "You're not free. And neither am I." His expression hardened, his silver eyes flashing. "You know nothing of my existence, Sylvain. You cannot comprehend the power I wield, the burden I carry." "I know that you're lonely," Sylvain said, her voice gentle. "That you're isolated. That you long for connection." His gaze faltered for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. He quickly masked it, but Sylvain had seen it. She had seen the crack in his armor, the hint of the man beneath the monster. "Don't presume to know me, Sylvain," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't presume," she said. "I feel it. I feel your pain, your loneliness." She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently touched his arm. His skin was surprisingly warm, almost feverish. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This time, she didn't pull away. He stared at her hand, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected her to touch him, to offer him any kind of comfort. He had expected fear, resistance, perhaps even hatred. But not this. "What are you doing, Sylvain?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm trying to understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Trying to understand you, to understand the pact, to understand myself." He looked at her, his gaze searching, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and longing. He had been alone for so long, isolated by his power, by his curse, by his past. He had forgotten what it felt like to be touched, to be seen. "You cannot understand me, Sylvain," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You cannot comprehend the darkness that I carry, the burden of centuries." "Perhaps not," she said. "But I can try. And perhaps I can help you. Help you to heal. Help you to break free." He looked at her, his silver eyes gleaming in the moonlight. He wanted to believe her, to trust her, to surrender. But he was afraid. Afraid of being hurt, afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of losing control. He took a step back, breaking the contact between them. "Don't be a fool, Sylvain," he said, his voice harsh. "You cannot change what is. You cannot break the pact. You are mine, and I will not let you go." He turned and started to walk away, disappearing into the shadows. Sylvain watched him go, her heart aching, her tears falling silently onto the ground. The touch, though brief, had ignited something within her, a spark of hope, a flicker of love. But it had also ignited something within him. She could feel it. A conflict, a spark of something other than darkness. And that, she knew, was just the beginning. Chapter 10. The Curse of the Ashen Blood. The encounter with Corvus left Sylvain shaken, but also strangely energized. The touch, the brief connection, the flicker of vulnerability she had glimpsed beneath his hardened exterior, it had all fueled a nascent hope within her. But his parting words, "You are mine," still echoed ominously in her mind, a reminder of the immense power he wielded and the seemingly unbreakable nature of the Ashen Pact. She spent a restless night, tossing and turning, her dreams filled with images of silver eyes, swirling smoke, and a wolf howling at the moon. Alara's journal lay open on her bedside table, the faded ink seeming to glow faintly in the darkness. She reached for it, her fingers tracing the words that had become so familiar, so personal. Alara's entries chronicled her growing understanding of the Wolf of Ash, her gradual shift from fear to pity, and finally, to a love that defied logic and reason. But interspersed with these accounts were descriptions of the curse, the toll it took on her, the way it drained her vitality, the way it changed her. Sylvain read of Alara's increasing sensitivity to fire, her ability to sense the presence of wolves, her growing connection to the other world. She read of the nightmares, the visions, the whispers that haunted her waking hours. She read of the physical changes, the silvering of her hair, the darkening of her eyes, the way her skin seemed to sparkle in the moonlight. Sylvain looked at her own hands, turning them over and over in the dim light. She had noticed a slight change in her own appearance over the past few weeks. Her hair, already streaked with silver, seemed to have become brighter, almost luminous. Her eyes, usually hazel, sometimes appeared to have a silvery sheen, especially in low light. And her skin, she had felt a tingling sensation, a warmth, whenever she was near Corvus, as if her very blood were responding to his presence. Was this the curse taking hold of her? Was she becoming like Alara? Like Corvus? The thought filled her with a mixture of fear and excitement. She had always felt a certain otherness, a sense of not quite belonging in the ordinary world. Perhaps this was why. Perhaps she was destined for something more, something extraordinary. But the curse was also a danger, a threat. Alara had died young, consumed by the very power she had wielded. Sylvain didn't want to suffer the same fate. She wanted to break the pact, to free herself and Corvus from its grip. She closed the journal, her mind racing. She needed to find out more about the curse, about its effects, about how to control it. She remembered Elias mentioning that the bond between the Wolf of Ash and a descendant of Alara was a merging of souls, a sharing of life force. What did that mean, exactly? How did it work? And what were the long-term consequences? She decided to return to the Wolfbane Historical Society. Despite the unsettling encounter with Corvus there, she knew it held the most comprehensive collection of information about the town's history, about the pact, about the Mercer family. She dressed quickly, choosing clothes that were both practical and comfortable. She grabbed her satchel, filled with notebooks and pens, and Alara's journal. She felt a strange connection to the book, as if it were a part of her, a link to her past, a guide to her future. She stepped outside, into the crisp morning air. The town was already bustling with activity, but Sylvain felt strangely detached from it all, as if she were living in a different world, a world of ancient magic and dark secrets. She reached the Historical Society and entered, the familiar scent of aged paper and leather filling her senses. The room was quiet, only a few patrons browsing the shelves. She went straight to the section on local history, her eyes scanning the titles, searching for anything that might shed light on the curse of the Ashen Blood. She found several books that mentioned the Mercer family, but most of them focused on their role in the town's founding, their contributions to the community, their tragedy. There was very little information about the pact itself, and even less about its effects on the Mercer women. She was about to give up when she noticed a small, unassuming book tucked away on a bottom shelf. It was bound in plain brown leather, with no title or markings. She pulled it out, her heart quickening. The leather felt strangely warm to the touch, as if it were alive. She opened it carefully, the pages brittle and yellowed with age. The ink was faded, but still legible, the script familiar. It was the same handwriting as Alara's journal, the same elegant, spidery script. She began to read, and her breath caught in her throat. It was another journal, a continuation of Alara's story. But this journal was different. It was more detailed, more explicit. It described the curse in graphic detail, the physical and emotional changes Alara experienced, the way it consumed her, the way it transformed her. It also described the bond with Corvus, the merging of their souls, the sharing of their life force. It described the power that flowed between them, the way they could communicate without words, the way they could feel each other's pain, each other's pleasure. Sylvain read on, her heart pounding, her cheeks flushed. The journal was both terrifying and alluring. It described a connection that was both destructive and exhilarating. A connection that transcended the physical world, a connection that bound them together forever. And in the margins, tiny drawings in what looked like dried blood depicted complex symbols, and alarmingly, a few of them were starting to appear faintly on Sylvain's own skin, just beneath the surface. Chapter 11. Hidden Truths in Camelot Attics. The discovery of the second journal, hidden away like a forbidden secret, sent a jolt of both fear and understanding through Sylvain. The intricate, blood-drawn symbols in the margins, mirrored faintly on her own skin, were a stark confirmation of the curse's deepening hold. She felt a pull, an undeniable connection to Alara, to her experiences, to her fate. She closed the journal, her hands trembling. She needed time to process what she had read, to understand the implications of the bond, the curse, the symbols. She couldn't stay at the Historical Society, not with the risk of Corvus appearing again. She needed a safe place, a place where she could think, where she could breathe. She decided to return to her cottage. It was the one place in Wolfbane where she felt a semblance of peace, a sanctuary from the growing darkness that surrounded her. She walked quickly, her eyes darting from side to side, scanning the shadows. She felt a growing sense of paranoia, a feeling that she was being watched, not just by Corvus, but by something else. Something ancient and powerful, something that resided in the woods, in the shadows, in the air itself. She reached her cottage and locked the door behind her, a futile gesture, she knew, against a threat that transcended the physical world. She lit a fire in the hearth, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She sat down at the small kitchen table, the second journal in front of her. She opened it again, her heart pounding. She needed to understand the symbols. They were clearly a key part of the curse, a manifestation of the bond, a language of magic. She spent hours poring over the journal, studying the symbols, comparing them to the faint markings on her own skin. She noticed patterns, repetitions, subtle variations. She realized that the symbols weren't just random drawings, they were a form of writing. A writing that spoke not to the mind, but to the soul. She remembered Elias mentioning that Alara had the ability to bind souls. Was this how she did it? Through these symbols? Through this magic? She decided to try something. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and focused on one of the symbols in the journal, a swirling, intricate design that resembled a wolf's paw. She traced the symbol with her fingertip, feeling a strange tingling sensation. She then traced the same symbol on her own arm, where she had seen the faint marking. As she did so, she felt a jolt of energy, a surge of power that coursed through her veins. She gasped, opening her eyes. The room seemed to shift, the colors becoming more vibrant, the shadows deeper. She felt a connection to something outside herself, something vast and ancient and powerful. She looked at her arm. The symbol she had traced was no longer faint, it was clearly visible, glowing faintly with a silvery light. It was as if she had activated it. She realized that she had stumbled upon something significant, something that could potentially help her understand the curse, to control it, to break it. But she also knew that she was playing with fire, dabbling in magic that she didn't fully understand. She decided to proceed cautiously. She would study the symbols one by one, learn their meanings, their powers, their secrets. She would use Alara's journal as her guide, her teacher, her connection to the past. She spent the rest of the day and into the night, working by candlelight, her mind racing, her heart pounding. She learned that each symbol represented a different aspect of the curse, a different element of the bond, a different power. She learned that one symbol represented fire, another represented the wolves, another represented the otherworld. She learned that some symbols could be used for protection, others for communication, others for control. She also learned that there was one symbol that was more important than all the others, a symbol that represented the heart of the pact, the core of the bond, the key to breaking free. It was a complex, intricate design, a combination of all the other symbols, woven together in a perfect, harmonious pattern. It was the symbol of love. As she stared at the symbol, she felt a surge of emotion, a wave of longing, a flicker of hope. She knew that this was the key, the answer, the way out. But she also knew that it was the most difficult symbol to master, the most dangerous symbol to wield. For it required not just knowledge, not just power, but surrender. Complete and utter surrender to her feelings for Corvus, to the bond that connected them, to the curse that bound them. It was almost dawn, the sky outside beginning to lighten with a pale, gray light. The candle on her table flickered and threatened to go out, and she felt the presence before she saw or heard anything, felt the familiar shift in the air, the electricity of him. Chapter 12. The moonlit hunt begins. The candle flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the room, a prelude to the darkness that always seemed to accompany Corvus's arrival. Sylvain felt his presence before she saw him, a subtle shift in the air, a prickling of her skin, a quickening of her heart. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him. Her focus remained on the symbol of love in Alara's journal. He materialized from the shadows near the fireplace, as if he had been there all along, waiting for her to notice him. He stood silently, watching her, his silver eyes gleaming in the dim light. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a mixture of anticipation and dread. "You've been busy, Sylvain," he said, his voice a low murmur that sent shivers down her spine. She finally looked up, meeting his gaze. She saw the familiar mixture of darkness and vulnerability in his eyes, the hint of longing that he tried so hard to conceal. "I've been learning," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her heart. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Learning what, Sylvain? The secrets of your ancestors? The nature of the pact? The power of the curse?" "All of those things," she said. "And more." He moved closer, his movements fluid and graceful, like a wolf stalking its prey. He stopped a few feet in front of her, his gaze fixed on the journal. "Alara's words," he said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "She had a way with words, didn't she? A way of capturing the heart." "She understood you," Sylvain said, her voice gentle. "She saw beyond the monster, beyond the curse. She saw you." His expression hardened, his silver eyes flashing. "Don't presume to understand me, Sylvain. You know nothing of my life, my burden. I know that you're in pain," she said. "That you're lonely. That you long for release." He turned away, his gaze shifting to the window, to the pale light of the approaching dawn. "Release is not for me, Sylvain," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am bound to this pact, to this curse, to this existence. But there's a way out," she said, her voice filled with hope. "Alara found it. She wrote about it. A way to break the pact, to free you, to free us both." He turned back to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of skepticism and longing. "What are you talking about?" Sylvain pointed to the symbol of love in the journal. "This," she said. "This is the key. This is the answer." He looked at the symbol, his brow furrowed. "What is it?" "It's the symbol of love," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Of true, unconditional love. The love that Alara felt for you. The love that she hesitated, unable to say the words, unable to admit the truth that was growing in her heart. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. The love that you what, Sylvain? She met his gaze, her heart pounding. The love that I am beginning to feel for you, she whispered, the words barely audible. He stared at her, his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't expected her to say that, to admit her feelings, to surrender. He had expected resistance, fear, perhaps even hatred. But not this. Not love. You love me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I think I do, she said, her voice trembling. I know it's crazy. I know it's impossible. But I can't deny it any longer. I feel it, Corvus. I feel it in my heart, in my soul, in my blood. He reached out, his hand trembling, and gently touched her cheek. His skin was warm, almost feverish. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her, a sensation that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Don't, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And just when she thought he would pull away, reject her, deny everything, his other hand cupped her face, his thumbs tracing the lines beside her mouth, his silver eyes searching hers. Suddenly, the door burst open, splintering wood flying across the room. 3 figures stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dawn light. They were dressed in rough clothing, carrying weapons, axes, knives, and crossbows. Hunters. We know what you are, beast. One of them shouted, his voice filled with hatred. And we're here to end you. Corvus snarled, his eyes flashing with anger, his body tensing for a fight. The hunt had begun. Chapter 13. Running with the Wolves. The hunter's sudden intrusion shattered the fragile intimacy that had begun to blossom between Sylvain and Corvus. The air, once charged with a nascent, hesitant love, was now thick with fear and the threat of violence. Corvus's reaction was instantaneous. He pushed Sylvain behind him, shielding her with his body, his silver eyes blazing with fury. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was both terrifying and protective. Get out of here, Sylvain, he commanded, his voice harsh, his gaze fixed on the hunters. Run. But Sylvain didn't move. She couldn't leave him. Not now, not when he was facing such danger. She remembered Alara's journal, the symbols, the power she had begun to wield. She had to help him. No, she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her heart. I'm not leaving you. The hunters advanced, their weapons raised, their faces contorted with hatred and fear. They were local men, townsfolk she had seen in the streets, in the shops, in the library. Men who had been consumed by fear, by superstition, by the legends. We know what you are, Wolf of Ash. The lead hunter shouted, his voice echoing in the small cottage. We know about the pact, about the curse, about the sacrifices. You know nothing. Corvus roared, his voice filled with centuries of anger and pain. He lunged at the hunters, his movements incredibly fast, his strength superhuman. He knocked one of them to the ground, sending his axe flying across the room. He grabbed another by the throat, lifting him off his feet, his eyes blazing with fury. But the third hunter, the one with the crossbow, took aim. Sylvain saw the glint of the silver-tipped arrow, the deadly weapon pointed straight at Corvus's heart. She reacted without thinking. She stepped in front of Corvus, shielding him with her body, her arms outstretched. She focused on the symbol of protection, the one she had learned from Alara's journal, the one she had activated. She felt a surge of power, a wave of energy that flowed through her veins. She closed her eyes, visualizing the symbol, willing it to work. The crossbow fired. The arrow flew through the air, heading straight for her, but it didn't hit her. It stopped, inches from her chest, suspended in midair, as if held by an invisible force. Sylvain opened her eyes, gasping. She had done it. She had used the magic, the power, the curse. She had protected Corvus. The hunters stared in disbelief, their faces pale with fear. They had never seen anything like this before. They had expected to face a monster, a creature of darkness. But they hadn't expected to face a witch. Corvus looked at Sylvain, his eyes wide with surprise and admiration. He had seen her power, her courage, her love. Sylvain, he whispered, his voice filled with awe. But there was no time for words. The hunters, recovering from their shock, renewed their attack. Corvus roared, throwing the man he held against the wall, knocking him unconscious. He turned to face the remaining hunter, his eyes blazing. "Run, Sylvain," he commanded again, his voice urgent. "Get out of here. Go to the woods. The wolves will protect you." Sylvain hesitated. She didn't want to leave him, but she knew he was right. She was a liability in this fight, a distraction. She had to trust him, to trust the wolves, to trust the magic. She nodded, her heart pounding, and ran towards the back door of the cottage, the one that led to the woods. She heard Corvus fighting behind her, the sounds of struggle, the snarls, the cries. She burst out of the cottage, into the cool morning air. The woods were shrouded in mist, the trees tall and imposing, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. She ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, her fear driving her forward. She heard the howling of wolves, close by, all around her. But it wasn't a terrifying sound, not anymore. It was a welcoming sound, a protective sound, a familiar sound. She saw them then, emerging from the mist, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. They were large, powerful creatures, their fur the color of shadows, of ash, of silver. They surrounded her, not attacking, but guarding. They were Corvus's wolves, his pack, his family. And they were here to protect her. She looked back towards the cottage, towards the town, towards the danger. She knew Corvus was still fighting, still risking his life. She wanted to go back, to help him, but she knew she couldn't. She had to trust him. She had to trust the wolves. She had to trust the bond. She turned and ran, deeper into the woods, the wolves running alongside her, guiding her, protecting her, leading her to safety. Or so she hoped. She ran with the wolves, feeling their power, their wildness, their freedom. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. The hunt was on, but she was no longer the prey. Not anymore. Chapter 14. The Price of Forbidden Knowledge. Running with the wolves, surrounded by their primal energy, Sylvain felt a sense of liberation she had never experienced before. The fear was still there, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but it was mingled with a strange exhilaration, a feeling of belonging, of connection. The wolves didn't speak, but she understood them, their movements, their intentions, their loyalty. They were guiding her, protecting her, leading her deeper into the woods, away from the town, away from the hunters, away from danger. But where were they taking her? And what would happen to Corvus? The thought of him, fighting alone against the hunters, filled her with a gnawing anxiety. She had to find a way to help him, to protect him, to save him. She remembered Alara's journal, the symbols, the magic. She had used the symbol of protection, and it had worked. But could she use the other symbols? Could she wield the power of the curse, not just for defense, but for offense? The thought was both terrifying and alluring. She had always been a scholar, a researcher, a woman of logic and reason. But now, she was embracing something else. Something primal, something magical, something dangerous. She slowed her pace, the wolves slowing with her, their eyes watchful, their bodies alert. She stopped in a small clearing, surrounded by tall pines, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. She reached into her satchel and pulled out Alara's journal. She opened it, her fingers tracing the symbols, the faded ink, the blood. She focused on the symbol of fire, the one that Alara had described as being particularly powerful, particularly dangerous. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and visualized the symbol. She traced it on her arm, feeling the familiar tingling sensation, the surge of energy, the heat. She opened her eyes. The symbol on her arm was glowing, not with a silvery light this time, but with a fiery, orange glow. She felt a warmth spreading through her body, a power that was both exhilarating and frightening. She raised her hand, focusing her will, her intention, her desire. She imagined the hunters, their fear, their hatred, their weapons. She imagined the fire, consuming them, destroying them, protecting Corvus. She felt a surge of power, a wave of energy that flowed from her hand, towards the town, towards the cottage. She gasped, stumbling back, the force of the magic almost overwhelming her. The wolves whined, their eyes filled with concern. They sensed her struggle, her pain, her power. Sylvain looked at her hand, at the symbol of fire, still glowing faintly. She had done it. She had used the magic, the power, the curse. But at what cost? She heard a distant roar, a sound of pain, of anger, of despair. It was Corvus. He was hurt. He was in danger. She had to go back. She had to help him. She had to save him. She closed the journal, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let fear control her. She wouldn't let the curse consume her. She would use the magic, the power, the love, to protect the one she loved. She turned and ran, back towards the town, back towards the cottage, back towards Corvus. The wolves ran with her, their howls echoing through the woods, a symphony of wildness, of loyalty, of defiance. As she approached the cottage, she saw it. The fire. It was raging, consuming the small building, the flames reaching high into the sky, the smoke billowing into the air. She stopped, her heart sinking, her tears falling onto the ground. The cottage, it was gone. And Corvus, where was he? She saw him then, lying on the ground, near the edge of the woods, his body battered and bruised, his silver eyes closed. The hunters were gone. She ran to him, her heart pounding, her fear overwhelming. She knelt beside him, gently touching his face. His skin was cold, his breathing shallow. "Corvus," she cried, her voice filled with anguish. "Corvus, please wake up." He didn't respond. He was unconscious, perhaps dying. Sylvain felt a surge of despair, a feeling of utter hopelessness. She had failed. She had used the magic, the power, the fire, but it hadn't been enough. She had lost him. But then she remembered. The symbol of love. The most powerful symbol of all. The key to breaking the pact. The key to healing. She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. She closed her eyes, visualizing the symbol, focusing her will, her intention, her love. She felt a surge of power, a wave of energy that flowed from her heart to her hand, to him. She felt the bond, the connection, the merging of their souls. She whispered his name, over and over again, her voice filled with love, with hope, with desperation. Corvus, 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 the forbidden knowledge had come at a price, but perhaps, just perhaps, it had also given her the only tool that could save them both. Chapter 15. A love that defies the flames. Sylvain whispered Corvus's name, a mantra of love and desperation, her hand clasped tightly in his, the symbol of love burning bright in her mind's eye. She poured all her energy, all her will, all her being into the connection, the bond, the merging of their souls. She felt the warmth spreading through her, a gentle, healing warmth, unlike the destructive heat of the fire symbol. Slowly, Corvus's eyelids fluttered. He groaned, his silver eyes opening, focusing on Sylvain's face. He looked disoriented, confused, pain etched on his features. "Sylvain?" He whispered, his voice hoarse. "I'm here, Corvus," she said, her voice choked with emotion, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here." He tried to sit up, but winced in pain. Sylvain gently helped him, supporting his weight. He looked around, at the burning ruins of the cottage, at the smoke-filled sky, at the wolves standing guard nearby. What happened?" he asked, his voice still weak. "The hunters," Sylvain said, her voice trembling. They attacked. They set the cottage on fire. I used the magic, the fire symbol, to drive them away. But you were hurt." He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You saved me?" "I tried," she said, her voice filled with self-doubt. "But I wasn't sure if it was enough. You were unconscious. I thought I had lost you." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, wiping away her tears. His touch was warm, comforting, reassuring. "You didn't lose me, Sylvain," he said, his voice gaining strength.
"You saved me."
"With your love." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning, with emotion, with truth. Sylvain had admitted her love for him, and he had acknowledged it. He had felt it, through the bond, through the magic, through her heart. "The symbol," he said, looking at her hand, at the faint markings on her skin. "You used the symbol of love." Sylvain nodded, her heart pounding. "It's the key, Corvus," she said. "The key to breaking the pact, to freeing us both." He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a new hope, a new light, a new love. He had been consumed by darkness for so long, bound by the curse, by the pact, by his past. But now, he saw a way out, a chance for redemption, a chance for happiness.
"How?"
he asked, his voice filled with longing. "How do we break it?" "We have to surrender, Corvus," Sylvain said, her voice firm. "We have to embrace the bond, accept it, become one. We have to let our love for each other consume us." He looked at her, his gaze intense, his eyes searching hers. He was afraid. She could see it. Afraid of losing control, afraid of surrendering, afraid of loving. But he also knew that it was the only way. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He focused on the symbol of love, on the bond that connected them, on the feelings that he had tried so hard to suppress. He felt a surge of power, a wave of energy that flowed from his heart, to his hand, to her. He felt the bond strengthening, the connection deepening, the merging of their souls. He opened his eyes, his silver eyes glowing with an inner light, a light that was no longer dark, but bright. A light that was no longer cold, but warm. A light that was no longer lonely, but loved. "I love you, Sylvain," he said, his voice filled with emotion, his words a vow, a promise, a truth. Sylvain felt her heart soar, her tears flowing freely, not tears of sorrow, but tears of joy, of relief, of love. She had done it. She had broken through his darkness. She had reached his heart. She had saved him. "I love you too, Corvus," she said, her voice choked with emotion. They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. The fire still raged around them, but they didn't feel the heat. They didn't feel the danger. They didn't feel anything but love. The wolves howled, a chorus of joy, of celebration, of freedom. The pact was broken. The curse was lifted. They were free. But as they held each other, surrounded by the flames, they knew that this was not the end. It was just the beginning of their new life, their new love, their new destiny. A destiny that they would face together, hand in hand, heart to heart, soul to soul. The flames, once a symbol of destruction and despair, now represented a cleansing fire, forging something new, something stronger, something eternal. Chapter 16. Betrayal beneath the ash moon. The inferno surrounding them, a testament to the hunter's hatred and the power of Sylvain's magic, began to subside, as if mirroring the breaking of the ancient pact. The air, once thick with smoke and the scent of burning wood, gradually cleared, revealing the devastation the charred remains of the cottage, a stark reminder of the violence they had endured. But amidst the ruins, their love stood strong, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. As the flames died down, the wolves, their howls now softer, more subdued, gathered around Sylvain and Corvus, their silver eyes reflecting the moonlight, their presence a silent affirmation of their loyalty and protection. "What do we do now?" Sylvain asked, her voice filled with a mixture of uncertainty and anticipation. The pact was broken, their love declared, but the world outside, the town of Wolfbane, remained a threat. Corvus looked at her, his silver eyes searching hers. "We leave," he said, his voice firm. "We leave this place, this town, this past. We start anew, somewhere far from here, somewhere safe." The idea of leaving, of escaping the shadows of Wolfbane, filled Sylvain with a sense of relief, of freedom. But it also sparked a flicker of sadness, a sense of loss. She had come to Wolfbane seeking answers, seeking a connection to her past, and she had found it, in the most unexpected, most profound way. But now it was time to move on, to create a new future, a new life with Corvus. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice hesitant. He smiled, a slow, sensual smile that sent shivers down her spine. "Somewhere where the wolves run free," he said, "and the moon shines bright. Somewhere where we can be ourselves." His words painted a picture of a wild, untamed place, a place of freedom and beauty, a place where they could truly be together. They began to walk, hand in hand, the wolves leading the way, their paws silent on the soft earth. They walked away from the burning ruins of the cottage, away from the town of Wolfbane, away from the past. They walked towards the woods, towards the mountains, towards the future. As they walked, Corvus began to tell Sylvain more about his life, his history, his curse. He told her of his childhood, centuries ago, in a small village nestled in the heart of the same mountains they were now heading towards. He told her of his family, his friends, his love. He told her of the day the curse had befallen him, the day he had been transformed into the Wolf of Ash, the day he had lost everything. He told her of the centuries of loneliness, of isolation, of despair. He told her of the pact, of Alara, of the bond. He told her of how he had watched her, from the shadows, from the moment she had arrived in Wolfbane. He had been drawn to her energy, to her spirit, to her blood. He had been both terrified and fascinated by her. He had known that she was the key, the one who could break the pact, the one who could free him. But he had also been afraid. Afraid of her, afraid of himself, afraid of love. He had tried to resist her, to push her away, to protect her. But he had failed. Her love had been too strong, too pure, too irresistible. As they reached the edge of the woods, the moon, full and bright, cast an eerie glow over the landscape. They paused, looking back at the town of Wolfbane, nestled in the valley below, the smoke from the fire still rising into the sky. Suddenly, Corvus stiffened, his body tensing, his silver eyes narrowing. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring, his senses alert. "What is it?" Sylvain asked, her voice filled with concern. "Someone's coming," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And they're not friendly." He turned, his gaze fixed on a figure emerging from the shadows, a figure that Sylvain recognized instantly. It was Elias. "Elias?" Sylvain said, her voice a mixture of surprise and confusion. "What are you doing here?" Elias didn't answer. He just stared at them, his eyes filled with a strange, unsettling light, a light that was not the gentle, kindly light she had always associated with him. It was a cold, calculating light, a light that betrayed a hidden darkness. He raised his hand, and Sylvain saw something glinting in the moonlight. It was a knife, a silver knife, the same kind of knife the hunters had carried. "Elias," Corvus said, his voice a low growl, his body tensing for a fight. "What are you doing?" Elias smiled, but it was a smile of cruelty, a smile of betrayal. "I'm finishing what the hunters started, Corvus," he said, his voice cold and devoid of the friendly librarian she thought she knew. He gestured with the knife to Sylvain, his eyes blazing with a possessiveness that made her blood run cold.
"And claiming what is rightfully mine."
Chapter 17. The Ritual of Unbinding. Elias's words, dripping with possessiveness and a chilling sense of entitlement, hung in the air, a stark betrayal that shattered Sylvain's perception of the kind, helpful librarian she thought she knew. The silver knife in his hand, glinting ominously in the moonlight, confirmed the horrifying truth. Elias was not who he seemed.
"Mean?"
Sylvain repeated, her voice trembling, her mind reeling. "What are you talking about, Elias?" Elias stepped closer, his eyes fixated on Sylvain, a predatory gleam in their depths. "You, Sylvain," he said, his voice a low, possessive growl. "You are the key to unlocking the true power of the Ashen Pact. not to break it but to control it. Corvus moved in front of Sylvain, shielding her with his body, his silver eyes blazing with fury. "Stay away from her, Elias," he growled, his voice laced with a menacing threat. Elias ignored Corvus, his gaze locked on Sylvain. "I've been studying the pact for years, Sylvain," he said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone, as if he were back in the library, explaining some obscure historical detail. "I know its secrets, its intricacies, its potential. Alara was a fool. She used the love aspect to weaken the pact, to delay it. But I know how to use it to strengthen it, to make it unbreakable." "You're insane, Elias," Sylvain said, her voice filled with disgust and disbelief. "Love is not about control, it's about freedom." Elias chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound.
"You naive child," he said.
"Love is a weapon, Sylvain.
A tool.
And I intend to use it to wield the power of the Wolf of Ash, to control him, to rule." He lunged at Sylvain, the silver knife aimed at her heart. But Corvus was faster. He intercepted Elias, grabbing his wrist, his grip like iron. The knife clattered to the ground, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. Corvus and Elias struggled, their bodies locked in a fierce embrace. Corvus was stronger, faster, but Elias was surprisingly agile, his movements fueled by a desperate, fanatical energy. "You can't stop me, Corvus," Elias hissed, his face contorted with rage. "I know the ritual. I know how to bind you to me, to make you my slave." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, leather pouch. He opened it, revealing a handful of dark, shimmering powder ash, mixed with something else. "This is the key, Sylvain," Elias shouted, his eyes gleaming with madness. "The ash of Alara, mixed with the blood of a wolf. It will bind him to me forever." He threw the powder at Corvus, the dark cloud enveloping him, making him cough and sputter. Corvus stumbled back, his eyes watering, his senses momentarily disoriented. Elias retrieved the knife and turned towards Sylvain, his face twisted in a triumphant grin. "Now, Sylvain," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "It's time for you to fulfill your destiny." Sylvain knew what he intended. He wanted to use her blood, her connection to Alara, to complete the ritual, to bind Corvus to him, to enslave him. But she wouldn't let him. She had come too far, loved too deeply, fought too hard to surrender now. She remembered Alara's journal, the symbols, the magic. She remembered the symbol of love, the power it held, the freedom it promised. She focused on the symbol, visualizing it in her mind, feeling its energy coursing through her veins. She raised her hand, her palm facing Elias, and whispered the words that Alara had written, the words that spoke of love, of freedom, of unbinding. A wave of energy emanated from her hand, a shimmering, golden light that enveloped Elias, pushing him back, breaking his hold on the knife. He screamed, his body convulsing, his eyes filled with terror. The ash that had surrounded Corvus dissipated, his silver eyes clearing, his strength returning. He looked at Sylvain, his gaze filled with awe and love. Elias fell to his knees, his body trembling, his power broken. The leather pouch, containing the remaining ash, slipped from his grasp and spilled onto the ground. The wind picked up, scattering the ash, dispersing it into the night, rendering it useless. The ritual was undone. The threat was neutralized. Elias was defeated. Corvus went to Sylvain, taking her in his arms, holding her close. "You did it, Sylvain," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion.
"You saved me."
"You saved us. We did it together, Corvus," she said, her voice choked with tears. "We did it with love." They looked at Elias, lying defeated on the ground, his eyes filled with hatred and despair. He was no longer a threat, but he was a reminder of the darkness that still lurked in the world, the darkness that they had to escape. They couldn't kill him, but they couldn't leave him to potentially recover and try again. Corvus looked to the wolves, and with an unspoken understanding, the pack encircled Elias. He would live, but he would not leave the forest. He would be their prisoner, watched, contained, forever a part of the wild they had tried to exploit. Sylvain and Corvus turned and walked away, hand in hand, the wolves following close behind, their howls now a song of triumph, of freedom, of love. The ash moon, once a symbol of betrayal and darkness, now shone brightly upon their path, illuminating their way to a new life, a new beginning, a new destiny. Chapter 18. Scars of the Past, Hopes of the Future. The escape from Wolfbane was a blur of hurried movement and whispered reassurances. Corvus, with his heightened senses and intimate knowledge of the surrounding wilderness, guided them through the dense forests and over treacherous mountain paths, the loyal wolves flanking them like silent guardians. Sylvain, though physically exhausted, found a new wellspring of strength in Corvus's presence, in their shared love, in the promise of a future free from the shackles of the Ashen Pact. They traveled for days, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the town that held so many painful memories. They slept under the stars, huddled together for warmth, sharing stories and dreams, their bond deepening with each passing moment. Corvus spoke of his long life, the centuries of solitude, and the burden of the curse, while Sylvain shared her experiences as a historian, her fascination with the past, and her newfound understanding of the power of magic and love. They eventually reached a secluded valley, nestled high in the mountains, a place of breathtaking beauty and tranquility. A crystal-clear river flowed through the valley, its waters sparkling in the sunlight, surrounded by lush meadows and towering peaks. It was a place untouched by the darkness of Wolfbane, a place where they could truly begin anew. "This is it," Corvus said, his voice filled with a sense of peace and contentment. "This is where we will build our home." Sylvain looked around, her heart filled with a sense of wonder and hope. It was a perfect place, a sanctuary, a haven. It was a place where they could heal, where they could grow, where they could love. They began to build a new life for themselves, a life free from the constraints of the past, a life built on trust, respect, and love. They built a small cabin near the river, using materials found in the surrounding forest. Corvus, with his strength and his knowledge of the wilderness, provided for their needs, hunting and gathering food, while Sylvain, with her intelligence and her resourcefulness, created a comfortable and welcoming home. They spent their days exploring the valley, discovering hidden waterfalls, ancient trees, and breathtaking vistas. They learned to live in harmony with nature, respecting its power and its beauty. They learned to live in harmony with each other, their love deepening with each passing day. But the scars of the past, both physical and emotional, remained. Corvus still carried the marks of the hunter's attack and the memories of his long, lonely existence. Sylvain still felt the lingering effects of the curse, the heightened senses, the connection to the otherworld. And they both carried the weight of the betrayal, the pain inflicted by Elias, the knowledge that darkness could lurk even in the most unexpected places. They talked about their experiences, sharing their fears and their hopes, their pain and their healing. They learned to support each other, to comfort each other, to love each other through the darkness and the light. One evening, as they sat by the river, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple, Sylvain turned to Corvus, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you, Corvus," she said, her voice soft. "For everything. For showing me this place, for sharing your life with me, for loving me." He smiled, a gentle, loving smile that reached his silver eyes. "Thank you, Sylvain," he said, "for saving me, for freeing me, for loving me." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. His touch was warm, comforting, reassuring. "We have a long way to go," he said, "but we'll do it together. We'll face whatever comes our way, hand in hand, heart to heart, soul to soul." Sylvain nodded, her heart filled with a sense of peace and contentment. She knew that their life wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges, that there would be scars. But she also knew that they had each other, that they had their love, that they had their future. And as they sat there, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, surrounded by the beauty of the valley, they knew that they had found their home. A home built not on ash and blood, but on love and hope, on trust and freedom. A home where the scars of the past could finally begin to heal, and the hopes of the future could finally begin to bloom. The air was clean, clear, and free of the scent of ash. Chapter 19. The Heart of the Inferno. The peaceful existence they had carved out in the secluded valley was a balm to their souls, a sanctuary where they could heal and rebuild. But the past, like a persistent shadow, had a way of resurfacing, even in the most idyllic of settings. One day, as Sylvain was exploring a nearby forest, she stumbled upon a cave hidden behind a curtain of cascading water. Intrigued, she ventured inside, her heart pounding with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The air within the cave was cool and damp, the silence broken only by the dripping of water and the faint echo of her own footsteps. As she moved deeper into the cave, she noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that were eerily familiar. They were similar to the ones she had seen in Alara's journal, the ones that represented the Ashen Pact, the curse, the magic. But these symbols were different. They were more complex, more intricate, more powerful. They seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light, a light that was both alluring and terrifying. She reached out, her hand trembling, and gently touched one of the symbols. A jolt of energy surged through her, a wave of power that made her gasp. She felt a connection to something ancient, something vast, something dark. She stumbled back, her heart racing, her mind reeling. She realized that she had stumbled upon something significant, something that could potentially shed light on the origins of the Ashen Pact, on the true nature of the Wolf of Ash, on the source of a curse. But she also knew that she was treading on dangerous ground, delving into secrets that were perhaps best left undisturbed. She returned to the cabin, her mind filled with questions, her heart filled with dread. She told Corvus about the cave, about the symbols, about the power she had felt. Corvus listened intently, his silver eyes filled with a mixture of concern and fascination. He had sensed the presence of something ancient in the valley, something that resonated with his own past. "We have to go back," he said, his voice firm. "We have to understand what it is, what it means, what it wants." Sylvain hesitated. She was afraid. She couldn't deny it. But she also knew that they couldn't ignore this discovery, that they couldn't run from the past any longer. They had to face it, together, to understand it, to conquer it. They returned to the cave the next day, armed with torches and a renewed sense of determination. They spent hours studying the symbols, deciphering their meanings, unraveling their secrets. They discovered that the cave was not just a random collection of markings, it was a shrine. A shrine dedicated to the Wolf of Ash, not the cursed creature that Corvus had become, but the original being, the source of his power, the heart of the Inferno. They learned that the Wolf of Ash was not a demon, not a monster, but a spirit of fire, of passion, of life. A spirit that had been worshipped by the ancient inhabitants of the valley, centuries before the town of Wolfbane had even existed. They learned that the Ashen Pact had not been a bargain made with a malevolent entity, but a perversion of an ancient ritual, a twisting of a sacred tradition, a corruption of a powerful force. Alara, they realized, had not been trying to appease a monster, she had been trying to restore the balance, to heal the spirit, to reclaim the original power. But she had failed. The curse had been too strong, the darkness too deep. Sylvain and Corvus now understood that the key to truly breaking free from the past, to truly healing the scars, was not just to break the pact, but to restore the spirit, to cleanse the curse, to reclaim the heart of the Inferno. They found a central chamber within the cave, a large, circular space with a natural altar in the center. The walls of the chamber were covered in symbols, even more complex and intricate than the ones they had seen before. And in the center of the altar, there was a basin filled with a dark, shimmering substance, ash, mixed with something else. It was the same substance that Elias had used in his attempt to bind Corvus, the same substance that Alara had used in her attempt to heal him. But this ash was different. It was pure. It was untouched by the darkness of the curse. It was the essence of the Wolf of Ash, the source of his power, the heart of the inferno. Sylvain and Corvus knew what they had to do. They had to perform a new ritual, a ritual of cleansing, a ritual of restoration, a ritual of love, a ritual to restore the original spirit. They stood before the altar, hand in hand, their hearts pounding, their souls ready. The wolves, sensing the importance of the moment, gathered at the entrance of the cave, their howls a prayer, a plea, a promise. The very air crackled with anticipation, with power, with hope. It was time to face the inferno, not with fear, but with love. Chapter 20. A new dawn, a new pact. The air in the cave thrummed with a palpable energy, a confluence of ancient power and the burgeoning love between Sylvain and Corvus. They stood before the altar, hand in hand, the basin of pure ash shimmering before them, reflecting the flickering torchlight and the determined glint in their eyes. The wolves, their silent sentinels, watched from the cave entrance, their howls a mournful yet hopeful symphony echoing through the chamber. Sylvain and Corvus looked at each other, their gaze locking, a silent communication passing between them. They had come so far, faced so much darkness, endured so much pain. But through it all, their love had grown stronger, deeper, more resilient. And now, they were ready to face the final challenge, to heal the heart of the inferno, to restore the balance, to forge a new dawn. They began the ritual, not with the frantic desperation of Alara, nor with the malicious intent of Elias, but with a quiet, unwavering certainty, guided by the symbols on the cave walls, by the knowledge they had gleaned, and by the power of their love. Sylvain, drawing on her connection to Alara, to the ancient magic, to the other world, began to chant, her voice soft yet resonant, echoing through the chamber. The words were not from Alara's journal, not from any written text, but from her own heart, from her own soul, from her own understanding. Corvus, drawing on his connection to the Wolf of Ash, to the spirit of fire, to the essence of his being, joined her chant, his voice deep and resonant, blending with hers in a harmonious duet. He felt the power surging within him, not the destructive force of the curse, but the pure, untainted energy of the original spirit. As they chanted, the symbols on the cave walls began to glow, illuminating the chamber with a soft, ethereal light. The ash in the basin began to swirl, to shimmer, to transform. It was no longer just ash, it was light. Pure, radiant, healing light. Sylvain and Corvus raised their hands, their palms facing the altar, and channeled their love, their energy, their souls into the basin. They felt the power flowing through them, connecting them, binding them, not in a curse, but in a promise. A new pact. A pact not of sacrifice and darkness, but of love and light. A pact not of control and domination, but of balance and harmony. A pact not of fear and despair, but of hope and freedom. The light in the basin intensified, growing brighter, warmer, more powerful. It rose from the basin, forming a swirling vortex, a column of pure energy that reached towards the ceiling of the cave. And then it coalesced. It formed a shape, a figure, a being. The Wolf of Ash. But not the monstrous creature of legend, not the cursed being that Corvus had become. This was the original spirit, the pure essence, the heart of the inferno. It was a magnificent creature, a wolf made of pure light, its fur shimmering with all the colors of the flame, its eyes glowing with an ancient wisdom, a boundless compassion, a profound love. The spirit looked at Sylvain and Corvus, its gaze gentle, its presence awe-inspiring. It didn't speak, but they understood. They felt its gratitude, its relief, its blessing. The spirit then turned its gaze towards Corvus, and with a gentle nod, it merged with him, becoming one with him, healing him, transforming him, completing him. Corvus felt a surge of power, a wave of energy that cleansed him, purified him, freed him from the last vestiges of the curse. He was no longer the Wolf of Ash, the creature of darkness. He was Corvus. Just Corvus. A man. Whole and free, loved and redeemed. He looked at Sylvain, his silver eyes, now clear and bright, filled with tears of joy. He reached out, taking her hand, his touch gentle, his love unconditional. The light in the cave subsided, the symbols returning to their dormant state, the ash in the basin settling. Now just ash. The ritual was complete. The spirit was restored. The balance was achieved. The new dawn had arrived. They left the cave, hand in hand, the wolves following close behind, their howls now a song of pure joy, of celebration, of love. They emerged into the sunlight, the valley bathed in a golden glow, the air fresh and clean, the future bright. They had faced the inferno, and they had emerged victorious. Not through force, not through magic, but through love. A love that defied the flames, a love that healed the scars, a love that transformed them both. They stood on the mountain top, overlooking the valley that had been both a place of healing, of growth, and of trial. And as they prepared to move forward in life, hand in hand, they knew one thing for certain. They could meet anything, as long as they were together. They stood looking over the mountain, ready to face any challenge, any adventure, any darkness, for as long as they had each other. Epilogue. Years passed, marked not by the turning of pages in a dusty ledger, but by the changing seasons in the valley that Sylvain and Corvus now called home. The cabin they built together stood as a testament to their resilience, their love a beacon against the backdrop of the towering mountains. The wolves, their loyal companions, roamed free, their howls a familiar and comforting sound echoing through the valley. Sylvain and Corvus had found peace, a profound and enduring contentment that stemmed from their shared journey, from the darkness they had overcome, from the love that had blossomed amidst the ashes. The scars of the past remained, a reminder of the trials they had faced, but they were no longer wounds that festered, they were marks of strength, of resilience, of transformation. Corvus, freed from the curse of the Wolf of Ash, had embraced his humanity, his mortality, with a newfound appreciation for the simple joys of life. He spent his days exploring the wilderness, hunting and gathering food, his connection to nature deeper and more profound than ever before. He had aged, his silver eyes now crinkled at the corners, his once dark hair now streaked with silver, mirroring Sylvain's. But his spirit remained youthful, his love for Sylvain unwavering, his heart filled with a quiet, enduring joy. Sylvain, her connection to the other world still present, had become a guardian of the valley, a protector of its ancient secrets, a keeper of its magic. She continued to study the symbols, to learn from the past, to understand the delicate balance between the human world and the spirit world. She had aged, too, her auburn hair now more silver than red, her face lined with the map of her years, but her hazel eyes still sparkled with curiosity, with intelligence, with love. They often returned to the cave, the heart of the inferno, not with fear or apprehension, but with reverence and gratitude. They would stand before the altar, hand in hand, remembering the ritual, the transformation, the new pact. They would honor the spirit of the Wolf of Ash, the pure essence of fire and passion, the source of their freedom. One evening, as they sat by the river, watching the sunset paint the sky in a breathtaking display of color, Sylvain turned to Corvus, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Do you ever regret it, Corvus?" she asked, her voice soft. "Leaving Wolfbane, leaving your past?" He looked at her, his silver eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. "Never," he said, his voice firm. "My past was a prison, Sylvain. You set me free. You gave me a future. You gave me love." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his touch still sending a spark of electricity through her, even after all these years. "And you, Sylvain?" he asked. "Do you ever regret coming to Wolfbane, seeking answers, delving into secrets?" She smiled, shaking her head. "Never," she said. "Wolfbane led me to you, Corvus. It led me to my destiny. It led me to love." They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. The years had weathered them, changed them, but their love remained, a constant, enduring force, a testament to their resilience, their courage, their transformation. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they looked out over the valley, their home, their sanctuary, their paradise. They had found peace, they had found freedom, they had found love. And as they stood there, hand in hand, heart to heart, soul to soul, they knew that their journey, their story, their love, would continue as long as the mountain stood tall, as long as the river flowed free, as long as the wolves howled at the moon. Their story, written not in ash and blood, but in love and light, would endure, a testament to the power of the human spirit, the magic of connection, and the enduring strength of a love that defied the flames. The scent of the valley was sweet, and the only whispers were the gentle breezes, carrying the scent of wildflowers, pine, and the clean, rushing water of the mountain streams.